Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're setting aside the usual talking points, the outrage cycles. Our mission here is really to cut straight through all that political chatter. We want to identify the core ideological fault lines and, well, the institutional ones too, that are actually shaping what's going on. We've got a stack of sources here that, honestly, they tell a pretty cohesive story. It's not just about conflict, but maybe about institutional and ideological collapse.
That's absolutely right. The material we have really give you a roadmap. It helps you understand not just, who's winning elections, but what kind of political identity is actually gaining ground on both sides. And crucially, we're pairing that with some, frankly, striking examples of institutional dysfunction, showing how these long-held norms, things like transparency, basic competence, how they're eroding fast and at the highest levels of government, too.
Okay, let's try and unpack this. Maybe start with the internal battles. The ideological struggle for the soul of the Democratic Party. Politico highlighted several primary races that seem to be testing the Democrats' future, and we've zeroed in on three that seem to reveal these, well, deep fissures between generations and ideologies.
Right, let's begin in Maine, the U.S. Senate primary there. Our sources rate this one highly instructive, a 5 out of 5, actually, because it just perfectly illustrates this conflict. You've got entrenched power versus progressive energy. On one side, there's Governor Janet Mills. She's the party establishment's pick. A moderate 77 years old, a known quantity, right? 4 statewide wins under her belt.
And the thinking from the establishment is pretty clear, isn't it? Her profile makes the general election simpler. It becomes a straightforward referendum on the moderate Republican incumbent Susan Collins. They want stability, no surprises.
Exactly. But then there's the disruptor, Graham Plattner. He's an oysterman, an outsider, decades younger, and the sources describe him as much leftier. He introduces what they call wild cards. And the party machine, well, it absolutely hates wild cards. What's fascinating here, though, is what the sources note. Nationally, this might look like just another rerun of the, Hillary versus Bernie dynamic.
But the real insight here isn't just about youth versus age, is it? It's more about whether this national progressive energy can actually overcome some deeply entrenched local demographic facts. Like, Maine has the oldest median age in the whole country, 35.1 years. That reality might just, temper the fire of this progressive insurgency when people actually go to vote.
Okay, moving south then. The Tennessee 9th Congressional District primary, rated a 3 on the instructive scale. It shows that same generational tension, but in a really different context. Here, the entrenched power is represented as Steve Cohen, white, 76 years old, going for his 11th term.
And he's up against Justin Pearson. Pearson is black, half a century younger, and, well, significantly more liberal. If that name sounds familiar to you, it probably should. He was one of those Tennessee state House members who got expelled, remember, for speaking out, causing good trouble, as they say, and then he was quickly reelected by his constituents. He's really the ultimate activist candidate, isn't he?
He is, and the factors working in Pearson's favor are pretty significant. The district itself is 60.2% black, so identity politics definitely plays a major role. Plus, Cohen is Jewish. The sources suggest that, depending on how things unfold, particularly regarding Israel, this could create some political fallout that he's quite vulnerable to.
So if we try to connect the dots here, whether it's that sort of quieter conflict up in aging Maine or the really fiery activism down in Memphis, these races seem to reflect this fundamental conflict. Moderation versus the demand for activist candidates, younger candidates, more ideologically liberal ones.
Yeah, what really stands out is that the Democratic base seems angry. And in Pearson's case, they're actively rewarding that visible activism. But doesn't the success or potential success of a good trouble candidate like Pearson maybe suggest something like this demand for activist politicians might actually be a better measure of party health than just sticking to moderation?
It certainly suggests a higher tolerance for risk, maybe. Yeah. Before we move on, we should probably just quickly touch on the California gubernatorial race. Our sources rate it as minimally instructive, a 1, even with that crowded field. The reason they rate California so low is basically because their primary system, that nonpartisan top 2 system, it often produces outcomes driven more by local stuff, personalities, rather than being a clear signal of national ideological trends. What happens in California often stays in California, politically speaking.
Precisely. Okay, so let's leave the primaries for now and pivot. Let's look at this idea of systemic breakdown in established institutions. We really need to examine 2 areas where these norms, transparency, basic competence, seem to be, well, breaking down. The Pentagon and the Department of Justice.
Yeah, the Pentagon situation, it's particularly alarming, I think. because it hits right at the freedom of the press. You had the entire press pool, except for one reporter from OANN, which is a conservative outlet. They all declined to sign this pledge that the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, demanded.
And the policy itself is, well, radical. This pledge would grant Hegseth and his staff, and I'm quoting here, complete control over the information reporters could use. And if you broke the rules, you faced being deemed a security threat.
President Trump, maybe unsurprisingly, supports the policy. He said Hegseth finds the press to be very disruptive in terms of world peace.
Okay, but why? Why now? After decades of standard operating procedures, why would the DoD suddenly push for such an extreme policy? That's really the core question, isn't it? And here we have to lean on the analysis from Tom Bowman, the former military correspondent, and also retired General Mark Hertling. Bowman reminds us about Thomas Jefferson, right? Establishing the critical role of the press. Jefferson said, "Our liberty depends on its freedom, and that cannot be limited without being lost."
Right, and this is where the Hertling analysis becomes really important.
Yeah, Hertling highlights the real danger. He says this policy collapses a vital distinction. The difference between essential operational security, which, genuinely protects missions and personnel,
Right.
and what he calls poisonous, institutional protection.
Institutional protection.
Yeah, basically shielding the organization itself from scrutiny or embarrassment. Hertling argues this is toxic to public trust and actually runs against the interests of the DoD itself.
That distinction, security versus just self-protection, that feels absolutely crucial. Okay, now let's turn to the Justice Department. A different kind of institutional failure seemed to be on display there, more like sheer unpreparedness, maybe, especially during the prosecution of former FBI Director James Comey.
Oh, the arraignment was chaotic, to put it mildly. The prosecutors, Gabriel Diaz and Nathaniel Tyler Lemons, they were apparently clearly caught off guard when the judge, Michael Nachmanoff, just set a trial date, January 5th.
And they actually admitted it to the judge, that they were, quote, only just starting to get their hands around the case. I mean, why would the prosecution bring an indictment on a case that's 5 years old if they weren't even ready to lay out the core charges?
Is this source suggesting this was just like political theater? Well, the sources strongly suggest something more than just simple incompetence. It points towards a system that's maybe more focused on the spectacle of the indictment itself rather than the actual rigor of the prosecution. And the judge was clearly incredulous and irritated, according to the reports, refused to delay the trial, even when they brought up classified material issues. It showed his frustration with the prosecution just being completely unprepared.
And the defense attorney, Pat Fitzgerald, he's obviously jumping all over this, right? Demanding extensive discovery, pointing out the indictment doesn't even specify the exact false statement Comey supposedly made. The defense team is basically saying they're in the dark about what they're even defending against. Which, yeah, that speaks volumes about how hastily this case might have been brought.
It really paints a picture, doesn't it? A Justice Department may be under pressure, where the institutional norms, requiring competence, due diligence before an indictment, maybe those got significantly neglected here.
Okay, so if institutions that are designed for accountability, for transparency, are showing this level of breakdown, maybe we shouldn't be too surprised that political identity itself seems to be collapsing, or at least getting very weird. Which brings us to what our sources called Freaky Tuesday. Politicians adopting these completely unexpected ideological personas.
Yeah, this phenomenon really shows the instability, maybe, of modern political philosophy. Just look at Speaker Mike Johnson. He used to be known for kind of mixing the statesman persona with the partisan, right? Splitting the difference between the GOP factions. Now, though, the sources say he is fully channeling his inner Donald Trump, just trying to maintain power.
And you can see this shift in specific things he's said and done, right? Like calling the COVID-era Obamacare subsidies a boondoggle and claiming incorrectly, according to the source's analysis, that they actually increase insurance costs for everyone, which isn't true. He also declared that a Marxist ideology is taking over the Democrat Party. And for the first time ever as speaker, he actually went and participated in a Freedom Caucus meeting.
Right. And this rightward populist turn. Our sources interpret it not as some kind of philosophical awakening, no. They see it as purely transactional, a commitment to kissing Major Mégier posterior, because he fears a rebellion from the hard right more than he fears losing any moderates. It's a calculation.
Okay, but then the plot really thickens when you look at Marjorie Taylor Greene, because she seems to have simultaneously adopted this startlingly left-wing populist persona.
It's quite something. She's been all over the map. calling for Obamacare subsidies to be extended, declaring the Gaza situation a genocide. She's lambasted ICE raids, calling for a smarter plan than just mass deportations. And she's even calling for an end to the Senate filibuster, blaming weak Republican men for the gridlock.
I mean, that's a list of positions.
Yeah.
You could genuinely hear that from a progressive Democrat running on an economic populist platform. It's wild.
Yeah. And the source analysis concludes this ideological fluidity. It isn't a sign the MAGA coalition is cracking. Not really. Instead, Green, much like Trump perhaps, seems to lack a really coherent, grounded philosophy. Her actions seem driven by emotion, maybe, an immediate tactical advantage. So the real identity swap, the sources argue, is this kind of freaky threesome, where Johnson starts sounding like the hard-right Green and Green starts sounding like a left-wing populist, all driven by different pressures of power.
Okay, finally, let's try and connect this theme of institutional instability back to the actual mechanics of democracy. There's a significant legal development affecting voting in Pennsylvania.
Right. This involves the Federal Court of Appeals. They denied a GOP effort to revive a challenge to Pennsylvania's rule about dates on mail-in ballots, the date instruction rule. This rule basically said counties couldn't tally ballots if the outer envelope was undated or had the wrong date, even if the ballot itself arrived on time.
And the original judge, who was actually a Trump appointee, ruled that this requirement violated the First and 14th Amendments, called it an undue burden on the right to vote. Essentially saying a technical error, one that's unrelated to whether the ballot was submitted on time, shouldn't disenfranchise a voter.
Exactly. The appeals court ultimately upheld that initial ruling, but the vote was close, an 8-6 decision against rehearing the case en banc. And that dissent is revealing. The 6 dissenting judges argued that a brand new Pennsylvania Supreme Court ruling had kind of eliminated the need for federal intervention anymore.
How so? How did the state ruling change things?
Well, the new state ruling requires county officials to actually notify voters if there's a defect, like a missing date, and give them a chance to fix it, to cure the defect. So because the state now provides this fix, the dissenting federal judges argued that the undue burden the federal district judge originally cited, well, it's been fixed at the state level now, making the federal injunction unnecessary. It's a really nuanced legal fight over who gets to set the rules for fixing ballot mechanics.
Oh, wow. Okay, so today we've covered quite a bit. The fierce struggle for the ideological soul of the Democratic Party, the decay, maybe, of institutional competence shown by the Pentagon transparency issue, and the DOJ's, well, haphazard prosecution, and the surprising fluidity of political identity, with Johnson and Green doing their Freaky Tuesdays swap.
Yeah, and what really stands out, I think, across all these different stories is this recurring theme, boundary pushing. And critically, maybe a lack of immediate accountability. Remember, our sources also discussed that scandal involving those thousands of vile text messages, racist, anti-Semitic, sent by young Republican leaders.
Yeah.
And the source predicted pretty bluntly that these individuals will suffer no real consequences. They'll surely be allowed to continue as young Republican influencers.
That prediction, that feeling of impunity, it connects directly back, doesn't it? To the Pentagon policy trying to shield itself, the DOJ bringing a case maybe without full preparation.
It does. So, if the sources are suggesting across these different contexts that there are effectively no real consequences for people engaging in really vile rhetoric or actively pushing the boundaries of institutional behavior, what does that tell you? What does it tell you about the future standard for political accountability, for leadership in America? What norms, if any, are left that seem universally enforceable?
Something definitely for you to mull over as you navigate the news this week. Thank you for diving deep with us today.